There was no trumpet of alarm, no furious hooves or arrows whistling past the ramparts. Only the sound of a spoon scraping an empty iron pot, clink, clink, and a quiet sigh slipping through the icy morning. My name is Annis. People don't call me by it unless they need to assign a task or raise their voice. I am a servant in a northern castle, not grand, not splendid, but with walls thick enough to keep the wind from screaming through every crack in winter nights. There would be nothing worth telling if you're looking for tales of kings or conquests. I know nothing of those. I only know how cold water numbs the hands when washing tablecloths, and how fire singes your face when you stand too close to the coal stove. But if you've ever wandered in a castle with no war drums, who lights the hearth before dawn, who scrubs the chipped porcelain cups, who sighs over watery porridge, and still wipes the tables with cracked hands, then this is the story for you. Just an ordinary day in an unremarkable winter. But within that ordinariness, some things ring quietly, like the soft clinking of dishes in the cold wind. Chapter 1. Dawn in the fading mist. I always knew I had to wake before the first light. Not because I feared being late. No one counts the hours for servants in this castle, but because I liked hearing the silence of the world before it stirs. That was the only moment in the day when I wasn't being called, ordered, watched, or hurried. Just me bare feet, numb on stone, and breath fading into the fog. Today was especially cold. No snow, but the mist hung thick like smoke. I opened a small wooden door to the back courtyard. The hinge groaned like an old man complaining and took a breath. The scent of damp earth, cooled ashes, and bark scraps left from last night. The moon hadn't fully set. A bluish light shone through a rotted wooden frame, casting my shadow long across the uneven stone yard. I carried the iron bucket, walking slowly toward the well. It sat in the corner of the garden near a crooked stone fence, where in summer the grass grew up to your knees, and in winter only mud and broken twigs remained. The rope was worn, but still usable. I wrapped cloth around my hands and turned the crank. The bucket screeched as it rose from the deep well, a sound of metal and water colliding, cold, slick, and dense like the morning itself. I carried 2 full buckets back to the kitchen. Water splashed out a little as I climbed the stone steps, soaking the edge of my skirt. I didn't mind. My eyes were used to the pale light, my ears to the crackling of coals in the old stove. I crouched to start the fire. Today's wood was scraps. Probably the good kind had been saved for the main kitchen. I gathered the pieces shaved off the damp bark with a small knife, spread dry straw, and lit it. The fire popped, gently crackling like an old man's cough. I leaned in close so the heat could warm my face and keep my hands from going numb before work began. Once the stove was hot enough, I placed a copper pot on the iron grate. With the other hand, I rinsed some mud-covered vegetables, gray cabbage, and a few limp carrots. I wasn't cooking for myself. I was cooking for the gardeners, the gatekeeper, the young runner girl. They didn't know who made their meals. Only that every morning, a pot of thin porridge steamed in the nameless kitchen. While waiting for the water to boil, I washed a load of towels. I used cold water from the bucket, couldn't spare the hot water, as I needed it for lunch and sat on the ground, scrubbing each hand towel, each tablecloth. My hands grew so cold, I lost feeling in them. I had to bite my lip not to groan every time I wrung out the cloths. But if I didn't do it now, they wouldn't dry by evening. Daylight crept in, not in a blaze of sun, but by slowly pushing back the dark with a dull gray. I heard the storeroom door creak open, then footsteps across the stone yard. It was probably Gareth, the flour man. He always woke second after me, and he always greeted me with a silent nod. "Cold, isn't it?" he said today, breaking routine. I just smiled, didn't answer. partly because I had a sliver of ash wood in my mouth to keep from grinding my teeth, partly because I wasn't used to being asked anything. When the porridge boiled, I added the vegetables, a pinch of coarse salt, and a few dried onion slices. The onion fumes stung my eyes. I stirred the pot and set the lid down for a gentle simmer. While waiting, I hung the towels on the line, pinning them tightly with wooden clips so they wouldn't blow away like the lady's silk scarf I once dropped, which earned me a punishment. Back in the kitchen, I noticed the brass spoon still had soot stains. I scrubbed it with pumice, my hands aching from the cold metal. Every spot of rust was a complaint waiting from the head cook. I'd been punished before for a bent spoon, even though it wasn't my fault. And from then on, I learned silence and good work are the only ways to keep a place to sleep. When the small courtyard bell rang the signal for breakfast for the lower staff, I had already lined up the bowls on the tray. Wooden ones for the blacksmith stoneware for the gardener, the chipped one for the messenger girl. I placed them neatly, knowing they'd return in far worse condition. I opened the kitchen door. Wind rushed in like a starving beast. I leaned forward, balancing the tray in both hands, and walked slowly toward the side dining room. Nothing more than an old oak table and backless chairs. Some were already seated. They didn't talk, just stared into their bowls as if something better than porridge might appear. I placed the tray down and stepped back. No one thanked me, and I didn't expect them to. I returned to the kitchen and kept washing the greasy tablecloths from last night. My mind was empty. No thoughts, no plans, just the rhythm of hand water and cloth. That's how I kept myself sane. A sound came from above. A chair dragged heavy footsteps heading toward the main hall. Maybe a nobleman up early. Maybe the storekeeper. I didn't care, as long as they didn't call my name. The fire smell had faded. The light now showed grime on the wall, a handprint maybe mine from yesterday. I took a rag, dipped it in water, and wiped it away. No one told me to, but I did it. Because if I didn't, I'd feel like I was disappearing. Mornings like that stretch out like an endless cold breeze, but they pass eventually, bit by bit. Crumbs on a plate, specks of ash bowls clinking gently together, a quiet sound, but enough to remind you you're still alive. I sat on the stone step hands, resting on my knees, watching steam rise from the wash basin. The kitchen no longer smelled of porridge, only cold ashes and old grease on the walls. I breathed softly, and for the first time that morning did nothing, just watched sunlight like threads begin to drift down onto the uneven ground. A little servant girl dashed past the door, arms full of papers and lips shiny with butter. She didn't greet me. I didn't mind, because I too had once been that girl, always rushing, always lacking something: time, strength, affection. The bell rang again. Breakfast time for the guards. The main kitchen would handle that. I wasn't allowed in there unless summoned. We, the lowest tier of service, lived apart from the bright rooms, the real tablecloths, the silver spoons. I emptied the dirty water out back, rinsed the basin. The tin bowls were pitted with rust cold, like a reminder that some tasks are never new and some people never move up the ladder. When I returned, Gareth was back with a sack of flour on his shoulder. He dropped it on the tile and dusted off his hands. "Watch your step," he said, and nodded before heading out back to prep for lunch. I quietly wiped the flour trail on the table, thinking not of eating, but of serving the next meal. As I got the next pot of water ready, a call rang down from upstairs. Anis, the housekeeper's voice, dry and impatient. I wiped my hands, dropped the cloth, and rushed up the steep wooden stairs. Each step creaked. The laundry room door stood wide open. She stood in the middle, pointing at a pile of unfolded tablecloths, her brow tight. "Why are these still damp? I hung them this morning." The mist was thick, so they haven't dried yet. No excuses. Guests from the city are coming for lunch. If they're not dry in time, you'll polish the silver with your hands. Understood? I bowed my head. Yes, ma'am. I hurried down to the yard, turned all the cloths over, brought fresh ones to dry near the stove. The smell of damp fabric meeting fire gave me a headache, but I sat nearby, turning them every hour. If I didn't, I'd be called again. If I were called again, I might lose my dinner. Time doesn't move faster when you work harder. It just passes differently through woods stretching in sunlight, sweat gathering on your neck and soaking into your collar. I live inside those details. When the midday bell rang, another round of work was about to begin. But I had managed to dry the necessary linens. I picked them up still warm and thought, that's one more small victory, a victory no one knew. No one celebrated, but I knew. And sometimes, that's enough. If you're still here listening to the story of someone whose name is never written in any history book, then maybe you're like me, someone who cherishes the small things that time often forgets. Leave a note below if you've ever thought of history as something quiet, and if this story touches something in you. Hit subscribe, not to follow me, but to preserve the humble sounds that drift through time. Chapter 2. Midday in the downstairs kitchen. The midday bell in the castle wasn't loud, but everyone knew to stop what they were doing. It signaled a shift change, the start of preparing the main meal in the busiest hours of the day. The mist was gone. The stillness vanished. Everything moved faster, sharper, and louder. I set the basket of dry linens on the shelf, checking each one carefully. The housekeeper would come back to inspect them, and I had no wish to stand in the laundry room again today. The midday kitchen belonged to others. I was in charge of water dishes and cleaning the tools after each round of cooking. The head cook was Mr. Brannock, a stout man balding with a voice like a boiling cauldron. He didn't like chatter, and he hated dropped spoons. I stepped into the downstairs kitchen. As the coal stove blazed hot, the large copper pot boiled over, and 4 kitchen assistants were arguing about onions. The smell of hot fat mixed with salted fish filled the air thick and choking. I didn't cover my face, but I breathed through my mouth to make it bearable. Annis, you're here. Have you seen the long wooden chopstick a girl named Rhea asked? She was the only one in the kitchen who smiled at me, though her smile often came with a cloud of smoke. I left it by the salt bin last night. Thanks. Don't forget to wipe down the butcher table later. They chopped raw chicken this morning and no one cleaned the knives. I nodded. No one had time for small talk in the kitchen. The main soup today was braised beef bones with purple cabbage. I was in charge of watching the fire topping off water when it ran low and stirring constantly to keep the bottom from burning. The work didn't require thinking, but it demanded patience and hands that hadn't yet gone numb. I stood by the pot, sweat beating at my neck. The firelight flared against my face, making me feel half-burned. Nearby, another assistant was slicing turnips, peeling ginger, and dropping dough cakes into bubbling oil. The hot oil spat with sharp crackles like tiny raindrops. Every time someone finished a task, I had to clean up. Quickly, quietly. Wipe the counters, rinse the knives, gather the vegetable scraps. Every movement had a rhythm, and I had memorized it. I never left knives facing the wrong way. I never let water puddle underfoot. I had learned how not to draw attention, but not to disappear either. A servant who knows her place like an old nail holding a wooden beam small, worn, and forgotten. As the main meal neared completion, I helped portion the food into wooden tubs. Some were sent upstairs for the housekeeper clerks and lady guests. some for the guard room. A small portion was set aside for the gardeners, the blacksmith, and people like me. I didn't count who ate what, but I remembered who never returned their bowl clean. When everything was cleared, I returned to the wash basin and the mountain of dirty dishes. Grease, porridge scum, hardened bone bits. My hands soaked in water for nearly 2 hours, cold, then hot, then cold again. I couldn't tell temperatures anymore, only a stinging pain like needles when drying the last bowl. While I was washing, a child ran in. Message from the city gate, they shouted. Everyone paused, looked up. Could be news from the count. Could be an inventory order. Could be war news. But to me, it made no difference. No letter ever mentioned Anis. I lowered my head and kept scrubbing. Someone whispered, "Heard there's a stranger coming to the castle." I rinsed the last bowl and dried my hands near the stove. My skin was red fingers stretched taut. But I didn't complain. Complaining only brought attention, and I didn't need more of that. Just then, a piece of cold bread appeared on the counter. Rhea. She winked and walked off. I picked it up and chewed slowly. The taste of burnt crust and sour yeast was a reward to me. When the bread cooled and the meat fat congealed into a pale skin, the air in the kitchen eased down like the stove itself had exhaled. No more knife clatter, pot bangs, or voices shouting over heat and onion stings. Only breathing now, quiet, tired breaths. I gathered the clean dishes, wiped them carefully, and stacked them on the wall shelf. Every bowl turned face down was a task completed. Every empty tray, a bit of burden returned to silence. As for me, I didn't need praise. I just needed to avoid reproach. That was the surest path to peace in this world. I leaned against the wall for a moment, glancing toward the small kitchen window. Outside, sunlight slanted across the courtyard. Stripes of light danced on the tiled floor, casting shadows through the wooden bars. A fly buzzed near the salt jar lid, but no one had time to swat it. This afternoon, the mistress wants her tea early, Rhea whispered as she passed. 3:30. I nodded. I remembered things like that, not because I was good, but because I never refused. I asked the housekeeper for a brief rest. She waved me off without looking up. I walked out to the back garden not to rest, but to breathe. The yard between the kitchen and laundry house was paved with uneven stones. One corner held a few herbs, mint, sage, lemon balm, all wilting in the cold. I bent to pluck some dry leaves, tucked them into my cloth pouch for tea later. A few drops of water fell from the gutter plip-plip like soft taps on my forehead. The wind wasn't strong anymore, but still cold enough to stiffen my collar. I stood a bit longer, then headed back. Inside the kitchen had been tidied. I boiled water on the small stove, dropped in mint leaves and a few slivers of dried ginger into a clay pot. The room filled with a mild, spicy scent, a relief after a day of grease and smoke. When the time came, I placed the tray on my hands and carried the tea to the parlor. The stairs to the upper floor were dark wood, each step creaking like I was entering another world. The light was softer. The smells weren't of food, but beeswax candles and dried herbs hanging on doors. I didn't look around. I had learned long ago servant eyes must not wander. I knocked gently, entered when allowed, placed the tea tray on the table, and stepped back. The mistress said nothing. A woman in a rabbit fur coat was chatting with her in French. I didn't understand and didn't need to. Their eyes flicked over me for half a second, just enough to remind me I wasn't part of the conversation. I bowed and slipped out, closing the door softly behind me. Back in the kitchen, the afternoon had settled in. The air smelled of cooled ashes, hollow bones, and the day's final breaths. I sat down beside the empty basin, dipping my hands in not to wash, just to be still. The carpenter's coming tomorrow to check the oven table, Rhea said. Might have to move things to the storeroom. I nodded. New day, new task. No day the same, but none different enough to remember. Before ending my shift, I folded all the cleaning rags, checked the salt jars, and arranged firewood for the morning. No one told me to. But I did it because I feared forgetting. When I left the kitchen, the sky had turned the color of ash. I returned to my sleeping quarters, a small room at the end of the servants' wing, with 4 beds made of old planks, a tiny window, and nothing on the walls. I placed the cloth that still smelled of mint on my pillow. A small habit, like a sign that I still existed in this space. The day drifted by like mist, faint quiet, and leaving only traces on my hands, the scent of clean bowls, rinsed water, and a hint of ginger left in the bottom of a clay pot. Chapter 3. Dusk and the clink of spoons at night. Dusk in the castle didn't arrive in warm golden light. It came in silence. Laughter faded. Footsteps slowed. Candlelight began to flicker on the walls, and the shadows stretched long and crooked. I rose from a short nap, not enough to recover, just enough to keep my head from feeling heavy. The wind had weakened, but the cold seeped deeper through my layers. I lit the hearth in the side kitchen, not for cooking, but to warm water for washing. A few pots needed to be cleaned again. Fat left sitting too long turns to stone. I worked by candlelight. Each breath I exhaled drifted out like thin smoke. Occasionally I heard sounds in the corridor, someone walking by, maybe a night guard or a runner called on short notice. But no one entered the kitchen. No one called my name. That was when I felt freest, when I was unseen. I sat alone, scrubbing pots and listening to the sound of spoons tapping against metal. Soft, steady, repetitive, but I liked it. It was a familiar rhythm, like the heartbeat of the kitchen. When everything else slept, it stayed alive. I poured myself a cup of warm water. No tea, no sugar, just hot water with a few dried sage leaves. I drank slowly, each sip easing my throat like I'd been granted silence. In the dim light, I saw the old embroidered cloth my mother had left me before she died. I kept it hidden in the bottom of the drawer, a tiny flower, just 3 colors, but every stitch was firm. I was never good at embroidery, so I never dared to add to it. Each time I looked at it, I remembered someone once called me by name, not by command. A mouse darted across the corner of the room. I didn't chase it. It too was just looking for a little something to survive on. Like me, it lived off what others left behind. The deeper the night grew, the lower the candle burned. I put out the fire, wiped my hands, and walked down the hallway toward the sleeping quarters. Wind whispered faintly through the window slats, like someone whistling in a dream. I walked slowly, hand brushing the wood wall, counting each step a habit from childhood, to remind myself I was still on solid ground. When I reached the bed, someone was already asleep beside me. Another servant, I didn't know her name. I didn't need to. We lived near each other, but not with each other. That was the safest way to be. I lay down on the hard wooden plank, pulled the blanket up to my chin, and stared at the dark ceiling. No stars, no lights, but I could still hear the sounds of the day echoing in my mind. The well water, the crackle of ash, the ceramic bowl tapping the pot's bottom. All of it still there, like the background music to a life no one sings about. I didn't fall asleep right away. My body was tired, but my mind kept hearing that spoon tapping a bowl, even though it had been washed and stacked neatly on the shelf. In the thick silence of the castle at night, that imagined sound rang out clearly. Ting, ting, sharp and real, like something had been left unfinished, like some duty still waited. I thought about the things no one ever taught me, but I'd learned anyway, that when a plate breaks, the servant gets blamed. Not because of the value of the plate, but because its breaking reminds someone that we exist, that someone is still touching their things, that their table doesn't set itself. In the dark, I thought of Rhea. I didn't know how she could still smile in all that smoke and shouting. Maybe she came from somewhere sunnier. Maybe someone had once called her name with laughter, not orders. Or maybe she was simply braver than I was. A long, bone-deep gust of wind slid through the window slit. I pulled the blanket tighter around my neck. The old fabric smelled musty, but comforting. It was mine, or more accurately, the one thing I was allowed to know as familiar in this castle. On the bed beside me, the other servant shifted. The wood creaked. A quiet breath, then stillness again. We didn't speak to each other, but we could hear each other's lives through these tiny sounds. I reached one hand out from the covers, quietly touching the old embroidered cloth from my mother. The fabric was worn, but the stitching was still clear. I closed my eyes and imagined holding her hand rough, but always warm enough to wipe away tears with the back of her palm. Outside, a dog barked from the upper courtyard, distant and hoarse. Someone returning late, or something prowling near the stone wall I didn't know. I didn't get up. I just lay there, hand clutching the cloth, waiting for the barking to stop, as if it were a ritual to confirm that the night was still moving forward slowly, but not standing still. I thought again about a dream I often had me standing in an empty kitchen. No people, no pots, no sound. I walked from door to door, but each one opened to a wall. No exit, no beginning. And then I'd wake up sweating, only to find myself truly in a kitchen again, but full of dishes, full of work, and full of people. Maybe I feared emptiness more than exhaustion. A long time later, I finally drifted off. Not into deep sleep, not into dreams, just into a soft darkness that pulled me gently away from the last imagined sound of a spoon tapping a bowl. Chapter 4. A stranger comes to the castle. I woke later than usual, not because I had slept well, but because last night had been colder than any before. The chill crept in through the small window, numbing my feet. When I opened my eyes, the bed beside me was already empty. The silence was so complete I thought I might have missed a bell. I washed my face quickly with cold water from the wooden basin, then headed out to the back courtyard. The fog was so thick I couldn't see the stone fence. But the first thing I heard wasn't water or footsteps. It was hoofbeats. Not the creaking wheels of a supply cart, and not the guards making their rounds. These steps were heavier, slower, and echoed farther. For a moment, I thought I had imagined it. But then the sound came again, clear and certain, followed by the groan of the great wooden gate swinging open. I froze in the middle of the yard. The scent of wet mud mixed with rotting straw and something unfamiliar fur or strong liquor. I heard a voice shout from above, then footsteps pounding down the stone stairs. A guest had arrived, and no one in the kitchen had been warned. When I returned to the main kitchen, the air was tight as a drawn bow. Head cook Brannock stood rigid, his eyes glowing like embers about to catch fire. "Prepare tea and pastries now," he barked. "Someone from the eastern castle has arrived." No mistakes. I didn't ask questions. No one did. Everyone moved into their practiced roles. I gathered mint leaves, picked the best brass tray, and re-washed the clay teapot, even though it was already clean. Rhea rushed over to help slicing apple pastries with quick, practiced hands. "Any news?" I whispered as we stood near the stove. "Word is, he's someone important here to inspect the land," Rhea replied. "Not from around here." I nodded. A stranger always meant change, and in a servant's world, change didn't always mean something good. When the tray was ready, I was the one chosen to bring it up. Maybe because my hands were steady, or maybe because I was easy to overlook, just trustworthy enough, just invisible enough. I carried the tray up the narrow stairway to the study. Colored glass windows cast red and purple light across the hallway in odd patterns. Voices floated out from the parlor, a low, unfamiliar voice with clipped pronunciation. Not a local tongue. I knocked. When summoned, I entered with my head lowered. I placed the tray on the center table. As I straightened up, I couldn't help but glance at the guest. A man around 40, wearing a long, gray cloak, leather gloves, and boots trimmed with mink. His face was sun-darkened but sharply defined. His eyes, black as coal, weren't looking at me, but at the window behind me. Peppermint tea he asked not to me, but to the mistress. The servants here are used to using fresh leaves, she answered, her voice light. He took a sip. Not bad. I stepped back, waiting to be dismissed. But just then, he turned and looked at me quick, sharp, as if something had just clicked into place. What's your name? I froze. My heart jumped. No one had asked my name in a very long time. I bowed my head. Annis, sir. Annis. He repeated it slowly, like testing whether the name fit his mouth. I was motioned to leave. The door closed behind me, but my heartbeat remained unsteady. My name had been spoken clearly, fully in a room of candlelight and powerful voices, and I didn't know why, but it made me afraid. I returned to the kitchen, my hands still trembling slightly. No one asked me anything, but Rhea looked at me for a long moment. At last she said, "It's nothing. Maybe he just thought your name was unusual." I nodded, but I wasn't comforted. That man, his eyes didn't look at me the way a stranger glances at a servant. It felt more like someone recognizing an old belonging, or someone searching and believing they had found it. The rest of the day, the castle's mood was tenser than usual. The gate guards changed shifts early. The upstairs maid had to rewash the table linens, and the mistress didn't come down to inspect the evening meal like she always did. She stayed upstairs with the stranger. I continued my tasks as normal, washing dishes, peeling vegetables, gathering firewood, but my mind kept circling back to the last time someone had asked my name. I was 12, newly arrived at the castle. It was the old head cook who'd asked. She never remembered my name afterward. As evening fell, I was sent upstairs again. This time, not with tea, but with a stack of embroidered cloths for selection. When I entered, the mistress was seated near the window, while the guest stood with his back to me, hands clasped behind him. I bowed, placed the cloths on the table, but before I could step away, he spoke. "Annis, were you born here?" I froze. "No, sir," I said. "I'm from the village of Fawi." He turned around, his black eyes fixed on me, not threatening but measuring. "Fawi," he repeated, "by the sea. Salt pans and a white stone church." I nodded. "Yes, sir. How old are you?" I glanced at the mistress, waiting for permission, but she remained silent, so I answered honestly, 21. He nodded slowly. "Do you have any family here?" I shook my head. "My parents have passed. I have no one." The room felt colder. Then he gave a small smile, a thin one, like a blade slicing the surface of still water. "Then you belong to this place," he said. "And this place belongs to you." I didn't understand, but I bowed, slowly backed out of the room. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay staring at the ceiling, wondering who was this stranger, and why did just a few questions make me feel like I was standing on a threshold I had never noticed before. Chapter 5. A grain of salt in a strange cloth bag. The next morning, when I came down to the kitchen as usual, I saw a small cloth bag placed next to the hearth. No one knew who had left it. Rhea said she thought it was mine, and the head cook shrugged it off, saying it might have been forgotten by someone delivering supplies. I picked it up. It was light, about the size of my palm, tied with a coarse twine. I opened it. Not seeds, not herbs, like I had guessed, but salt. Not the coarse salt we used in the kitchen. These grains were fine white and faintly fragrant, almost like they'd been mixed with dried orange peel. I pinched a bit and placed it on my tongue. A delicate saltiness, not sharp, and it melted quickly. I had never tasted anything like it before. Then I noticed a small piece of paper at the bottom of the bag. The ink was a reddish brown, the handwriting delicate, for the one who still remembers the taste of things that have been forgotten. I read it again and again. No name, no sign. But I knew who had left it. It could be no one else but the stranger from the night before. I hid the salt pouch beneath a loose floorboard. I didn't tell anyone, not because I was afraid, but because I didn't know how to begin. I didn't understand why he had left it, a message, a test, or something else I couldn't yet name. That entire day, I moved through my tasks as if walking across a bridge suspended over fog. Every action, peeling vegetables, washing dishes, folding cloths, felt as though someone or something was quietly watching. Not with eyes, but with a kind of expectant stillness. That afternoon, I was summoned to the study again. Not with tea, not with linens. Just, the mistress is asking for you. When I arrived, she was sitting alone. The stranger was no longer there. She didn't look at me when she spoke. He said, "You have special hands." I stood still, unsure how to respond. "Do you want to change jobs?" she asked. I looked up. She still wasn't looking at me. I answered softly, "If it's needed." "Not by me," she said. "By him." I was silent. I wasn't afraid, but I was unsettled. I didn't understand why my hands, cracked used to scouring pots, had caught anyone's notice. But the mistress didn't wait for me to understand. She simply said, "Starting tomorrow, you'll report to the upper storage rooms. Help sort antiques and old documents. He needs someone quiet, someone with careful hands." And so the next day, I no longer went to the kitchen. The upper storeroom was unlike anywhere else in the castle. No smoke, no clattering knives, no ash on the floor. Instead, dust. Dust on everything, on bookshelves, on wooden crates, on curtains that had been rolled up for years. I was brought up by a tall, lean man named Ellis, the stranger's assistant. He didn't smile, didn't greet me much. He simply pointed to each area. Over here, old leather books. There, ceramic items. That far side, maps, but no one's cataloged them. I nodded. I didn't ask questions. I didn't need to. My job was to clean, arrange, and stay silent. Each day I worked alone in that room. No one else came except Ellis and occasionally the stranger. I still didn't know his name. He would come and glance through some books or open large chests and stare at the contents as if trying to remember something lost. One morning, I discovered a small wooden box tucked behind a shelf. The lock rusted, but the lid slightly ajar. Inside was a cracked ceramic jar filled with a fine white powder. At first I thought it was chalk, but when I brought it close to my nose, I knew. It was the same salt as the one in the cloth bag I had received. I hadn't even touched it again when I heard the door open behind me. The stranger walked in. He didn't look surprised to find me staring into the box. On the contrary, he stepped closer and stood beside me, gazing at its contents. "You recognize it?" I nodded slightly. "It's not for cooking," he said. It's a kind of salt once used to preserve memories. I didn't understand. I stayed quiet. You're from Fowey, aren't you? I nodded again. There was a potter there. He made jars like these, small, thick with screw lids. In each one he placed a different salt. Each kind preserved a scent, an image, a feeling. Not by magic, by hand, by habit, by the patience of someone who refused to forget. I looked up at him. You knew him, I did, and I think you're his descendant. My heart pounded. I had never known any lineage beyond my kitchen hands. Not everyone can smell the difference between common salt and memory salt, he said, and not everyone can do meticulous work day after day without being told. I didn't know what to say. He gave a small nod, as if confirming his own thoughts, and left the room. That night, I went to bed very late. I placed the cloth pouch next to my chest, where I could feel its faint weight. And for the first time, I thought maybe life isn't just dishes and kitchen soot. Maybe I carry a piece of someone's memory inside me, and maybe that memory is asking to be brought back to life. Chapter 6. Cracked Pottery and Old Maps. In the days after discovering the salt box and hearing what he said about the potter from Fowey, I felt as though my hands were relearning themselves. Every time I touched a cracked piece of pottery, I wondered, do these hands share the blood of someone who once shaped imperfect forms full of memory? I began to examine everything in the storeroom more closely. There was a wooden shelf in the far back, crowded with old earthenware jars, most chipped at the mouth, cracked along the body, or covered in a dusting of ash from who knows when. I spent the morning wiping each one clean, and when sunlight from the small window struck them, they reflected back like skin, uneven speckled, but still holding warmth. One jar had a name carved into the base, Anwen, a woman's name. I flipped the others over, finding 8 more marked with strange symbols. A swirling wave, a small bird, and a horizontal line like a scratched-out mark. I carefully noted them on a scrap of cloth and tucked it inside my shirt. That afternoon, while sorting through bundles of old maps, I found a weathered leather scroll case bound with silver thread. Inside was a hand-drawn map, not of the land above, but of the spaces beneath the castle cellars connecting tunnels, and one room marked with a carved sign, Clay Hollow. My chest tightened. I remembered something my father once said. Clay Hollow isn't just where they took the earth. It's where people buried pieces of memory no one else would keep. I hadn't understood him then, and maybe I still didn't now, but I knew that place was calling me. That night, I brought the map to the stranger. He was sitting in the tower study, reading by the dim flame of an oil lamp. I found this, I said, handing him the scroll. He opened it, studied it, then looked at me for a long moment. You remember the way to Clay Hollow? Not clearly, but I passed it once. He nodded. I need to go there, but not alone. You want me to come? Not because you're strong, he said, but because I think you'll hear what I can't. I didn't answer right away. Then I nodded. We left the castle before dawn. Ellis didn't come. It was just the 2 of us and a small cart drawn by a brown horse. He wore a rough cloak, no crest, no servant, no introduction. He didn't speak much on the road. Neither did I. But the silence between us wasn't uncomfortable. It felt like the pause between chapters, both of us knowing something new was about to begin. When we reached the old hills of Fowey, I sensed something had changed. The trees seemed shorter. The wind no longer carried the same tune. Even the air smelled different of damp earth and dried flowers, a scent I thought time had erased. We camped near the base of the hill, not far from the old stream. That night, he pulled a small jar from his bag, one like the ones I'd seen in the storeroom, and asked, "Did your father leave anything behind?" I just remember his hands always smelled of earth and ash. And when he died, the only thing I kept was a cloth with a dry clay stain. He nodded. That's enough. The next morning we hiked deeper into the hills. According to the map, Clay Hollow was beneath a stone arch once the entrance to an old clay mine. I could feel cold air flowing from underground. We lit torches and stepped inside. The tunnel was narrow and damp at first, but the deeper we went, the drier and smoother the air became. At times it felt like we were walking through the body of something ancient, the red earth on both sides glowing like flesh in the firelight. Eventually, we reached a low-domed chamber. In the center was a stone table with 8 jars placed carefully on top, the same jars I had cleaned in the storeroom. He didn't touch anything. He simply sat and watched. Then he spoke softly. Each jar holds a scent, a memory, a moment. I stepped forward and picked one up. My hands trembled not from fear, but from the strange sense that I was touching part of myself. I opened the lid. The scent of ash, hearth smoke, damp cloth on the first winter morning. I closed my eyes, and I saw my father bent over Clay. His back stooped, but his hands still steady. He looked at me and smiled, then said, "Not everyone can hold memories in words. Some of us have to use earth." I wept not with sobs, but like water seeping from a hidden crack. When I opened my eyes, he was still sitting nearby. The lantern in his hand was nearly out of oil. "You can keep that one," he said. "Why? Because you remembered its scent. That means it's yours." I held the jar to my chest. I was no longer just a servant, no longer a pair of hands for dishes and laundry. In that moment, I was a keeper of memory. We left Clay Hollow with the sun high above us. I didn't know what awaited me back at the castle, but I knew that from now on, everything I did, washing a bowl, polishing a jar, held a deeper meaning. Because I was no longer just someone who lived inside other people's pasts. I was someone who touched it, wrapped it in clay, and gave it the chance to live again. Chapter 7. The East Wind returns to the old kitchen. We returned to the castle on an afternoon when light snow had begun to fall. No one welcomed us. No one asked where we'd been. The cart stopped at the side gate as if the journey had never happened. He stepped down first, then turned to look at me one last time. "You've touched something most people have forgotten," he said. "Keep it even if no one else believes it's real." I nodded. In my hands, the small ceramic jar wrapped in thick cloth made no sound, but it still felt warm. I returned to the kitchen. No one noticed I'd been gone. Rhea was still washing vegetables at the basin, the head cook still grumbling about bad potatoes. The air still held the scent of old ash lard and heavy footsteps. Everything was the same, but I wasn't. That evening, as I washed cloths in a basin of cold water, I realized something strange I had begun to hear. Not voices, but tiny sounds coming from within objects. A cracked bowl by the wall whispered the same phrase over and over. An old brass spoon sighed softly every time I scrubbed it. No one else heard it, but I knew I wasn't imagining it. I was holding on to what this castle had forgotten, each bowl, each trace of ash, each handprint on a tablecloth. A few days later, I quietly brought the small jar back to the upper storeroom and placed it beside the other cleaned, cracked jars. I opened its lid and left it there for an hour. When I returned, the layer of dust on the jar had changed it. No longer looked gray and dull, but as if it had absorbed a glint of light. I made a decision I would restore each jar one by one, not for display, but to return memory to things that once held life. Each night I spent an hour in the storeroom. I wiped the jars, recorded the markings on their bottoms, and listened to the sounds that came when I opened each lid. Some carried the faint smell of smoke, others the scent of old cloth left out in the sun. A few held no scent at all, only a sadness I couldn't name when I touched them. I started dreaming of my father again more vividly than before. In those dreams, he wasn't old or hunched over, but sitting upright, shaping clay with strong hands. He would say, "Each person is a piece of pottery. Not all are whole, but some broken pieces hold entire lives." I woke up feeling as though my fingertips were still dusted with wet earth. One day I forgot a jar on the kitchen shelf. A young maid named Lila picked it up, smelled it, and burst into tears. I asked her why. She said, "It smells like my mother's scarf when I was little." I didn't say anything. I simply nodded and quietly put the jar away. After that day, I began leaving jars in corners of the castle. No labels, no explanations, just small, silent objects that might help someone remember something they'd lost. Rumors began to spread that the castle had talking jars. Someone said they felt warm walking through the cold storeroom. Someone else claimed they heard their mother's lullaby echo in the third-floor hallway. I didn't confirm. I didn't deny. I simply continued. That winter stretched on longer than usual. Many in the castle fell ill, coughing feverish. I still worked as usual, but my tiny sleeping room was freezing. One night I couldn't bear it. I brought the ceramic jar under my blanket. Strangely, I didn't cough. I didn't fever. I woke warm, and my hands moved as easily as if it were summer. Rhea noticed and asked if she could have a jar. I made her one from scratch, mixing clay from the storeroom, shaping it to fit her hands, etching a linen pattern, because she loved the scent of sun-warmed fabric. She hugged that jar to sleep and slept well. The rumors spread farther. Strangers came to the castle asking to see the jars. The housekeeper asked who made them. I said nothing. But the stranger I had once traveled with returned this time with a few students. He didn't speak to anyone. He simply visited the storeroom, looked over the jars I'd made, and nodded to himself. Before he left behind a letter. "You can go, but you can also stay. If you choose to go, I will teach you to read what no one writes. If you choose to stay, keep doing what you do. Each jar, each crack is a chapter in the book this castle tried to forget." I read it over and over, then placed the letter next to the first jar I had ever opened. I hadn't decided yet, but I knew from now on, when someone asked who I was, I wouldn't just say, "I'm a servant." I would say, "I'm the one who listens to the pottery." I continued my daily work, cooking, washing cloths, scrubbing floors, as if the journey had never happened. But my mind no longer stayed in the downstairs kitchen. I began to look at every object in the castle, as though it could speak not in words, but through scent weight and tiny scars only familiar hands would recognize. I asked for a small patch of land behind the old storeroom, once used for drying firewood to build a kiln. Ellis approved, asking no questions. "As long as you don't burn the place down," he said, eyes still on his ledger. I smiled faintly. No one thought what I was doing mattered, which made it the perfect time to do something that truly did. I gathered clay from the little stream by the woods, filtered it, and mixed it with ashes from the main kitchen fire. I shaped jars that were uneven on purpose, made to look as if they had once fallen, been mended, and survived something. Then I fired them with scrap wood, never letting the flame burn too hot. Gentle, fire-strong pottery, my father's words echoed in my mind. Once cooled, I placed each jar into the hands of someone nearby, Rhea, who loved songs Garrett, who rarely spoke Lila, who still remembered the scent of her mother's fabric. I didn't tell them what to do, only said, "Keep it, and listen." After a few weeks, something began to change. Rhea started smiling while she worked. Gareth spoke to me 3 sentences in a row for the first time ever. Lila wrote a letter to her mother even though she had long passed. And me. I began keeping a journal, not in words, but in symbols carved into clay, a swirl for joy, a jagged line for sorrow, a small dent for things I couldn't name yet. I buried those jars in the garden corner marked with flat stones. Someone called me a clay witch. I didn't mind. I didn't explain. I knew women have always been called strange names when they dared to preserve what others forgot. One night, a heavy rainstorm came. Water flooded the storeroom, toppling the jars I had left behind. I spent the morning cleaning, wiping each one carefully. That's when I found an old jar cracked at the base with a piece of paper hidden inside. I opened it. What remains is not what people remember. It's what they choose to keep, even when no one believes it anymore. No name, no date. But I knew the words were meant for me. I etched the sentence into the bottom of the newest jar I had made. And for the first time in my life, I signed my name, Annis Memory Scribe, with bare hands. Chapter 8. When the Familiar Returns. I was washing dishes when he appeared. My hands were submerged in a basin of cold water, the rag soaked in cheap soap, the scent of leftover breakfast grease still floating in the suds. I was scrubbing the edge of a wooden bowl that had been scorched, likely used as a cutting board, muttering under my breath when I heard a soft knock at the door. Not the confident knock of someone from the castle, but a hesitant tap, as if the knocker wasn't sure they should be here at all. I opened the door. The man standing there wore a cloak stained with mud and melting snow, his hood pulled low. But when he lifted his face, the bowl slipped from my hands and shattered on the floor into 3 pieces. It was Ellis, not the old storehouse keeper, but my brother who had left home before I even knew how to light a fire on my own. 10 years, maybe more. I had thought he was dead. No news ever came, no letters, no word. We believed he'd been taken for conscription or had died in some prison camp far away. And now he stood in front of me silent as a ghost, his hand gripping the strap of a cloth bag, shoulders soaked through with rain. I didn't speak. I simply nodded and pulled him into the kitchen. Inside, the smell of charred wood, old candle wax, and hearth ash clung to the stone floor. I handed him a cloth to wipe his face, my hands still shaking. I cooked a pot of onion porridge, the kind our mother used to make whenever the weather turned cold. As I sliced the onions, tears fell faster than usual. I didn't know if it was from the onions or something deeper. While the porridge simmered, I gathered the broken bowl pieces from the floor. We didn't speak, but I let him sit in a small stool by the hearth, the spot I often took when I needed to listen to the fire breathe. When the porridge was ready, I served it to him in an uneven clay bowl. He ate slowly, spoon by spoon, as if tasting childhood in each strand of onion. Afterward, I handed him a small ceramic jar, one of the first I had made from clay, taken near the forest stream. Not as a test, just to see if something in him remembered. He held it up, tilted his head as though listening to something deep underground. Then he said, "It smells like the clothesline behind the house, where Mom used to hang lavender." I smiled. It felt like a piece of my heart had clicked back into place. He stayed. Every morning while I washed dishes in the smoke-filled kitchen, he gathered firewood, cleaned the old hearth, swept ash from the main oven. We didn't work side by side, but we were near each other. His footsteps familiar on the stone floor, the soft clinking of bowls in my hands together, composing a nameless rhythm. I taught him how to filter clay, how to gauge moisture with the palm of his hand. He taught me how to patch the kiln walls with ash and lime to keep the heat steady. Each afternoon, after the dishes were done, we sat by the fire, each holding a clay mug of warm water, steeped with wild mint. We told stories about our mother, the cottage we'd lost the time we both skipped school to pick mushrooms and ended up standing in the sun for hours as punishment. One day, I cut my hand while washing a knife. The blade slipped from the cloth and sliced into my thumb. Blood mixed into the dishwater, blooming like red ink. He grabbed my hand, wrapped it quickly, then looked me straight in the eye. "Don't try to do everything alone." I smiled, but didn't answer. I wasn't used to someone staying long enough to say such things. That night, he took me to the cemetery beyond the hill. Fog clung low to the ground. Our parents' graves, 2 worn stones, their names barely visible. He knelt, pulled a small ceramic jar from his coat pocket, imperfect with rough fingerprints still on it, and placed it at the base of the headstones. I wasn't there when they died, but now I've made this, he said. I didn't cry. I just rested my hand on his shoulder. Back in the kitchen, I returned to my daily routines, scrubbing burned pots, scraping pan bottoms, aligning bowls just right. But now, as I worked, I no longer felt like an invisible servant. I was someone who had welcomed a lost soul home. And I began to think maybe that shattered bowl from the morning had made space for something new to begin. In the days that followed, Ellis's presence slowly reshaped the rhythm of the space, not through grand gestures, but through small things. He fixed the oven door hinge that had squeaked for winters on end, polished the rusted vegetable knife. When I washed dishes, he brought warm water from the main hearth so my hands wouldn't tremble from the cold. At first, it bothered me. I wasn't used to being cared for. But gradually, I began to feel those quiet dishwashing evenings were the only thing that softened the long days. One night, after we finished cleaning up, we sat by the hearth. He pulled from his cloth bag a folded piece of paper, a drawing not precise but soft lines in chalk and charcoal across brown paper. He said, "I dream of building a pottery house not inside a fortress, but out in a field, where there's sun and wind and no need to bow to anyone." I stayed quiet for a long while, then replied, "Then you'll need a potter." We laughed while clean dishes clinked softly in the drying rack by the stove. The next morning I woke earlier than usual. The sky had not yet lightened, and the fog curled around the back courtyard like pale smoke. I took a newly fired jar to the well, rinsed it, then set it by the kitchen door. On the side of the jar I carved, "Not all winds are cold. Some bring someone home. I don't know how long I'll be able to keep him here, or how far my own journey might one day stretch. But one thing I know for certain, the sound of dishes clinking in the cold wind will no longer be alone." Chapter 9. Bricks, earth, and a field. Without a name. The morning began with the smell of damp ash and the sound of a shovel cutting into soil. I no longer woke to the kitchen bell, but to the footsteps of my brother outside the woodpile who was gathering old bricks, lime, and broken stones from abandoned corners behind the castle. I still washed dishes each morning, but my mind was elsewhere. I was calculating if I brought 3 pots, 6 bowls, and 2 water jars. How many could I wrap safely in straw? I wasn't planning to bring everything. Just enough pottery to build the foundation of a new kiln. Ellis had found an open patch of land near the edge of the forest, where a small stream flowed. The soil was soft, and few people passed by. An unclaimed clearing ignored by most, but to us it was a field without a name, a place to begin again. We asked the castle steward for permission not to leave right away, but to build a shed for storing wood and experimenting with clay. We phrased it that way so no one would pay too much attention. They agreed as long as we continued our duties, cooking, cleaning as usual. Each afternoon after the dishes were done, I packed ash straw and clay into burlap sacks and carried them toward the woods. Ellis had already placed bamboo stakes marking out the kiln's footprint. I built a canopy using old laundry cloths from the castle, once table linens from noble halls. Building an outdoor kiln wasn't easy. Every time the wind scattered the flames, I remembered my father's words, "The wind never listens, but the earth always does." We fired 3 times. The first burned too fast. The second didn't reach heat. The third time the glaze cracked, but we didn't feel discouraged. For the first time, fire from a kiln of our own glowed red across the nameless field. At night, I returned to the castle, soaked my hands in dishwater, and felt a quiet stirring in my chest. I wiped each bowl with a tenderness like I was wiping memory, preparing tomorrow's version of myself. One night, Lila, the youngest maid, passed through the kitchen and asked in a small voice, "Ennis, can I come with you tomorrow?" I didn't answer right away. But the next morning, I handed her a basket lined with unglazed bowls. She smiled, holding it like a kitten. When the first kiln was complete, we didn't invite anyone. We simply sat together, me, Ellis, and Lila, drinking mint tea from uneven clay cups, watching the fire glow in the sunset. I thought maybe no one will remember our names, or the watery porridge, the clean linens, or the sound of dishes clinking in the wind. But if there is a place where wind moves through red clay stoves and jars, tell stories in silence, then maybe we are no longer invisible. The days that followed were filled with damp earth and aching joints. I still washed dishes in the morning, still wiped tables and lit fires, but now, when I touched the bowls, I no longer saw them as hollow things. I imagined the new pottery we would make, not to serve orders, but to nourish a dream. Ellis experimented with a new glaze, a mix of ash eggshells and sap. The first time he fired it, the glaze turned soft blue like the sky at noon. I had never seen anything so gentle. One day, as I was setting out clean bowls to dry in the courtyard, a man arrived. Not a soldier, not castle staff, a trader. He'd heard rumors about a new pottery kiln near the forest. Ellis brought him to see. I didn't expect him to buy our work was uneven, imperfect. But he picked up a bowl, turned it slowly in his hands, and nodded. "This feels real." He placed a small order, 50 simple bowls to sell to roadside inns. Not much, but it was a start. When I returned to the castle, I washed each plate with trembling hands, not from exhaustion, but excitement. I sat alone in the kitchen, holding an old bowl, one I'd made long ago, before I even knew what glaze was. I studied the faint fingerprints, the uneven lines, and thought, this is where it all began, but not where it ends. That night, Ellis and I sat beside the fire. No words needed. Wind from the forest drifted through, carrying the scent of fresh earth and the faint sound of unstacked bowls clinking together in the dark. Chapter 10. The first kiln of Spring didn't arrive with birdsong or golden light. It came when I no longer had to warm my hands after the morning dishes. The well water wasn't as biting. The hearth ash no longer clumped. The towels I hung didn't need shelter from the wind under the eaves. The kiln near the forest edge still stood stronger now, having weathered the early rains. The makeshift roof had been replaced with wooden slats salvaged from the old storeroom, and Ellis built a windbreak from rubble stones. The kiln was no longer a temporary thing. It had shape, presence, and perhaps even a soul. We began firing our first order. Each bowl was carefully inspected. No cracks, no warped rims, no overglazed edges. Lila and I worked in silence, broken only by the broom brushing dry earth and the rustle of powdered clay shifting in baskets. As the flames rose, Ellis kept watch all night. I brought him water and stale bread, then sat beside him quietly. The fire reflected on his face, a face I'd once feared I'd forget. Now I knew even if we were parted again, I'd never lose the memory of his eyes. The next morning, we opened the kiln. Heat still clung to the bricks. Each bowl, 10, 20, 50, was pulled out by cloth-wrapped hands. None had shattered. The glaze set evenly like early spring light melting across stone rooftops. The trader returned this time bringing someone else. He looked over the wares, then smiled. Simple, but strong, like the people who made them. This time the order was bigger. 100 bowls, 100 teacups, and 5 small jars for a borderland chapel. I nodded. No rush, no fear. Just knelt, rinsed my hands in the nearby stream, and began kneading clay for the next batch. Spring didn't announce its arrival. But when your hands no longer turn purple in cold water and a fresh bowl no longer cracks in the kiln, you know the season has changed. And so has life. The days that followed moved with the rhythm of a heartbeat. Ellis began carving patterns into the clay. Lila learned how to attach handles to jars without cracking the rim. I guided a village child in kneading clay, her hands clumsy, but her gaze, just like mine, once was curious, patient, and quietly believing that even invisible things can take shape. The second batch finished firing on a light rain day. This time, the glaze was a soft yellow streaked with pale blue like accidental ink. But the trader liked it. He said it looked like an April sky, not bold, but honest. Word spread. A local innkeeper stopped by, then a monk, then a merchant from the city, the very one who once dismissed us. Now he came on his own. One afternoon, as I was polishing a newly fired bowl, Lila asked Annis, "Can I stay here? Not go back to the castle?" I didn't answer right away. I just handed her a soft cloth and nodded. Summer arrived gently. A cup of tea cooled slower, a drying cloth crisped in half a day. Ellis added a thatched shelter for drying clay and storing ash. I built a smaller kiln for pieces not bound to orders. That was where I made little birds, leaf-handled flower jars, and crooked bowls not for anyone, just because I wanted to. We were no longer servants. No one gave us orders. We didn't have to hide dirty hands in our aprons. But I kept one old habit each morning. I washed a single clay bowl in cold water and set it upside down on the windowsill, like a silent greeting to myself. One day a village boy asked, "Miss, why do you keep washing that bowl if you're not going to use it?" I smiled, because sometimes remembering is more important than using. Our first autumn passed quietly. Red leaves drifted past the kiln. I sat beside the stove holding a broken shard of pottery, not to fix, not to save. I placed it between stones near the stream, as a sign a piece once broken can still be seen. That night, while everyone slept, I stepped outside the workshop and looked at the sky. No moon, no stars, just a soft breeze and a familiar sound, the faint clinking of bowls as if the wind remembered too. I knew I'd gone far enough from the castle, not to forget, but to record, in clay and fire, and in every dish washed in the cold wind. If this story brought you a bit of warmth, a quiet moment to pause and listen, please subscribe to the channel and join me as we continue exploring the small lives tucked inside the vast sweep of history. Don't forget to turn on notifications so you won't miss the next chapters. It could be a new bowl, an old memory, or a stranger returning on the wind. And if something in this story stirred a memory, a scent, a sound, a quiet kitchen corner, leave a comment below. I'd love to read the pieces of the past you're holding on to.